Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Castleberry.
And I'm Austin Rowland.
Today, we are going to be talking about how to verify your advisor or your financial planner. So I want to give a little bit of background. We get a lot of comments every now and again, usually when there's some sort of big news event around like, hey, I heard this, or can you look at my advisor, or can I get like a second opinion? But one of the big things that happened locally for us recently was a local real estate investor was essentially investigated and found that his investment was a Ponzi scheme. We personally know some people that were taken advantage of. For those of you that don't know, Ponzi schemes are illegal and are fraudulent. Essentially, where you take someone's money and you spend it on whatever you want, but you tell them it's an investment, and then you pay them dividends by taking more people's money and using those people's money to pay the prior person, which works and seems like it functions until that essentially merry-go-round stops. So today we really wanted to spend some time and talk about, all right, how, if you are working with an advisor or you are shopping for an advisor or a planner, how can you verify what they say they're doing is correct? And what are some kind of red flags or some ways you can look them up to find out a little bit more information? So,
yeah, I would say that Ponzi schemes are few and far between. You certainly don't want to get involved or be affected by one. But I think more for everyday folks looking for an advisor, looking for some assistance with their financial life, there's just a lot. There's just a lot of different people who call themselves financial advisors. What are you looking for? And sometimes it's about weeding out the good ones from the bad ones, but it's also just about making sure that you're finding the right fit for what your need is.
And that's actually a great point. So the term advisor, specifically financial advisor, isn't really, there's not one definition. So you can have a guy that sells insurance and
that's advice.
Only sells insurance, like does no investment management, does no financial planning. They will call themselves a lot of times a financial advisor when in reality they are a life insurance salesman or an annuity salesman, both of which are just life insurance contracts. That guy will say he's an advisor. You will have a guy that is just what I like to call a broker. Oftentimes you see him in like a wirehouse, like a Morgan Stanley or Wells Fargo. Now, I paint that very generally because some of those guys do planning. Mm-hmm. But if your advisor just says, hey, here's a list of mutual funds or a list of single stocks and everything's about investing, and you ever ask the question, hey, like, am I set for retirement? And the answer is, just keep saving. That guy's a broker. He is a financial advisor, sometimes might even be a financial planner, sometimes might even have a CFP, which we'll talk about, but he's a broker. And if you have someone that's actually calling themselves an advisor or a planner, probably the biggest thing to look for if you have someone that's a planner is, do you have a plan? If they can't definitively give you a plan and say, hey, you're doing this because it does this 10 years from now, or you're doing this because it does this, and it maps out specifically to you, you probably have a broker or an insurance salesman. You don't have an actual planner. So I find a lot of times I ask people like, all right, you're working with a planner, and they say, yeah. I'm like, all right, what's the plan? And they're like, oh, well, they have me in mutual funds. I'm like, no, that's an investment strategy. What's your plan? And they're like, oh, well, they told me to open a Roth IRA. I'm like, that's where your investments are at. What's your plan? If you don't have a plan, it's not a planner. So, but getting into it, let's start off with first kind of basic level, and we'll kind of dwindle that down to more specifics of like, all right, where's the first place, Austin, you can go to like kind of find an advisor or not find an advisor, but double check your advisor.
Yeah. Let's paint the picture. So your friend works with an advisor. You're looking for one. They recommend this guy or girl, and they say they're fantastic. Mm-hmm. First thing you should do is you should just check them out. Do a Google search. Mm-hmm. Look at them. Look at their firm. I would start off by going to FINRA's broker check. So FINRA broker check.
Looks like this.
You can look up the individual's name. You can look up their firm, and you can kind of filter it out using the city or the state or the zip code. And when you do this, it's going to pull up some information specifically about that advisor.
Yeah. So I searched myself, so you can see me. You can see right here. Now, one thing we'll get to, there's also an SEC website, depending on how your advisor is registered. If you'll notice right here, it has me with 1 year of experience because I moved from a broker dealer originally to an SEC registered advisor. So you might find that your advisor is not on broker check. If that is the case, it might be that they have never worked for a broker dealer. So they've always worked for an RIA. So the next place you want to look is the SEC's website. Specifically, what you can do is, I always find it's easiest, rather than trying to remember the investment advisor public disclosure page, just Google search SEC advisor lookup. It's the easiest thing and it's the top one. And what you can do as well is then search I spelled my name right. Then search the advisor's name. It has, again, updated experience there, and you can see history, firms they've been with, same with broker check, history, firms they've been with, what exams they've passed. More importantly, you can see disclosures. So if they have ever had anything negative happen where someone took legal action and filed essentially a formal disclosure against them, that will be listed in one of these two places with an event of what happened and an explanation. You will be able to see what firms they've been with. You will be able to see how long they've been. You'll be able to see what licensings they have. Now, when we talk about licensings here, Austin, it's different from like designations. So
Correct.
when we talk about licensings, what are we talking about when someone looks up, say, Andrew, and it says he's passed 3 exams and they see the Series 6, the 66, what does that mean? What are those?
So a license is going to be something that allows you, based on the regulatory body that governs the industry you're in or the region that you're in. For instance, you can sell life insurance. There's going to be life insurance licenses. You can sell investment products. There's investment product licenses. In the type of industry that we're in, we are a local RIA firm. So the license that we have to have is the Series 65. Mm-hmm. That allows you to do business legally. It does not make you verified by the state of Georgia that you're a great advisor. Mm-hmm. It says that you can be an advisor.
It is, put it in other ways, the bare minimum. It is the gate of entry. A lot of times, and I heard this more at the beginning of my career. So I have a Series 7 and a 66, whereas you guys have a Series 65. So Austin never worked in the broker-dealer channel. You came in, probably, I would argue, the better channel, into the RIA, which is acting as a fiduciary, fee-based, not commission-based. Commission-based advisors, like what I started out as, take the Series 7 and then in turn the Series 66. Since you don't have any commission-based business or never did that, it's essentially a different exam that takes the commission side of it out and just merges those two together for the 65. Yeah. So it's arguably, I think, slightly longer than either of the two, but you don't have to cover some stuff.
Yeah.
But again, I would hear people say all the time, oh, well, I took the 7, I'm qualified. The 7 is, all right, so for people that have had trouble, I'm not trying to actively insult you. It is not a hard exam. It is... You study for maybe a month and then you take it, and you need no prior knowledge of the industry. And it gives you essentially the ability to offer advice in a legal format. Like a lot of YouTube financial pros on that point that offer advice technically aren't doing it probably
legally.
Legally, they wouldn't be able to start a firm and do it because they don't have that licensing. Some do, but a lot don't.
To bring it home, I think this is a great example. Everyone who has their driver's license can legally drive on the road. That does not mean they're a great driver. It means that they passed the examination needed for them to legally drive a car. But you probably know some people that you wish did not have their driver's license.
Or you would actively not be in the car with.
Correct. So I think that's a great example to say, hey, everyone who has their Series 65 or Series 7 or 66 or any other license that allows them to do business does not mean that they do great business or that they're a great advisor or that they're the right fit for you. So designations, on the other hand, a designation is a little bit different. A designation basically shows to the world, based on the designation you have, that you have gone through some sort of experiential learning, educational learning, and examination tested learning to prove that you have some skills and abilities that
help you with this industry. Now, I do want to point out there are different degrees and different levels of designation. FINRA, who also kind of runs BrokerCheck as well, they also have a list of professional designations. Now, again, you can Google search financial designations, and the first thing that pops up is FINRA.org. That is the essentially overarching organization that does a lot of regulation of our industry along with the SEC. As you can see, there is an extremely long list of different designations. Some of these are really good. Some of these, I would argue, are not useful at all and look great when you stack 3 or 4 of them on a business card, but don't necessarily mean anything. They're just kind of weekend courses, if you will. And actually, some of them are legitimately weekend courses. Like you go, you spend $500, you spend 8 hours at a seminar. At the end of it, you take a 10-question exam that's arguably designed for you to pass, and you get a designation. Now, there are some that have a little bit more impact, I would say. And Investopedia, if you guys aren't familiar, absolutely wonderful website if you were trying to build financial literacy. They do a great job of keeping these articles updated and kind of walking you through. There are a couple of designations I do want to point out that are kind of really significant and things you should look for. Again, having a designation, I want to preface, doesn't make you a good driver. It just means you took the time to go to a driver's ed course. It does, however, show that your advisor or the advisor you were interviewing has taken the initiative to truly try and better themselves and hone in their craft. And that's what you're wanting. Now, that's not to say there aren't advisors that don't have these designations that know just as much and love their craft as well. Some of them just either didn't do it. Some of them got busy halfway through. Like I know one that ended up having started it, had kids, paused it, and just has not gone back at this point. But it's one of those things. But as you're looking, probably a couple of big ones, CFP being the most common. That's a certified financial planner. That is what's on this mug, which I picked specifically for this podcast. Shameless plug. But that is one that is specifically for financial planners. What it essentially tells you is someone took a course. At one point in time, it didn't give you a master's level, and then later it did. A little annoyed that I did all of mine before they had the Masters of Financial Planning or Services on there, but whatever. But essentially, it's a master's level education course along with years of service. So you have a time requirement towards it, and then a pretty significant exam at the end. So for most people, it takes somewhere between 2 and 5 years. 1 to hit the requirement for work history, 2 to do the education component, and then the exam. So like the education and component exam for me, Austin, it was about 1.5 years for the education component, and then about another little over half a year for studying for the exam. And then I had to do 5 years of service before I could qualify. You have a little bit of a different route because you're studying for the exam next year. But walk through yours, what that looked like, because you went to UGA and you
Correct.
have the masters in.
Yes.
Which I'm not a little bit jealous for.
So there's I think the very first requirement, if you're going to get your CFP, Certified Financial Planner designation, the very first requirement is education. So you have to have some sort of formal education. There's courses online that you can take through Dalton, or there's a lot of different places you can take them. There's also different, bachelor's degree or master's degrees that you can get from certain institutions. And the CFP board determines if that degree qualifies for the educational component, which, for instance, I went to the University of Georgia. I started in the School of Business and got a finance degree, which you would think, oh, finance, that makes sense. It probably qualifies. It does not qualify. I then got my master's in financial planning from the University of Georgia. That did qualify. So the CFP board is pretty selective in deciding which courses or which degrees they're going to allow to satisfy that education requirement because they think it's very important.
Yeah.
Secondly, you have to have, like Andrew mentioned, a certain amount of time or experience. If you have your education taken care of, it's 2 years. In the exact industry that you're supposed to be in. So you can't go sell insurance for 2 years and then get your CFP. That's not the required
You're
industry
supposed
experience
to do
that they
actual planning.
correct. So they want to make sure that not only have you sat for, hours and hours and hours under competent teaching, directly related to the field that you're wanting to be in, but you've also done the work under somebody who has the experience that you're wanting to obtain. So, for instance, right now, I am sitting under Andrew, who has his certified financial planner designation, and that gives me the ability to do the actual work related to financial planning that prepares me to be a certified financial planner.
Correct.
I couldn't go pour concrete for 3 years and then turn around and be a certified financial planner. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and with your education side of it, now it's 2 years. Mine not going through that route through a program. So I did my education component through Boston University, but at the time it did not count towards my hours at that point. So I had to go and be practicing for roughly, I think it's almost 5 years. I think it's like 4,200 hours or something like that. But yeah, so CFP is the big one for planning. There's like 3 big ones, I'd say. Next big one's going to be CFA, which is Chartered Financial Analyst. Now, when you get to like the differences, I say CFA is probably harder to achieve. Out of all of these, CFA, CPA are probably the ones where like the tests are more of a bear because they're multiple part tests. They don't necessarily have the same education requirement, but the tests are longer, or it's several. Like CFA is 3 tests. Typically with a CFA, you're not going to see those as like your probably main advisor. In most larger firms, they might have 1 or 2 CFAs that do the portfolio management side of it. Again, or you're going to see a CFA that actually manages a fund. But typically, you're not going to see that as the sole designation for a financial planner, just because it has some planning related information, but it's a very small component, and most of what it has is asset management. The next big one's going to be a CPA, which is going to be a certified public accountant. Usually, again, you're not seeing this as the primary with a financial planner. Usually you might see a CPA with a CFP as well, or you might see a CPA as another associate at the firm you're working with where they do taxes and tax preparation. A couple other ones, like you have the CMT, you have the CIMA, you have the CIC. A really popular one is the CHFC, which is a Chartered Financial Consultant. I always call that one the, which I'm probably going to insult some people, baby CFP. It's just usually one where it doesn't have the time component. So what you see a lot of people do is they'll get the CHFC first and then get the CFP later. So they do have that education course. It is a pretty comprehensive program. It covers probably about 70%, I think, of what the CFP covers. It just doesn't have quite as lengthy of a requirement to achieve it. So a lot of people will get that in their first few years and then get the CFP later on at that point.
Yep.
But just know, there's a lot of those out there. Again, CFPs for planning is going to be kind of the gold standard. So look for that. You can have that and some supplementary ones. Like I have the CFP and the CIMA, which is a, I always forget if it's certified. Yeah, it's Certified Investment Management Analyst. Also, if you Google CIMA, it is a Chartered something Masters of Accounting, which is confusing, but that's more on like portfolio construction. So not quite as in depth as like the CFA, but again, there's a lot out there. So just make sure you're looking at that because it is important, but also make sure you just have that conversation to see when your advisor got that CFP. Because another thing too is you could get the CFP and then never lift a finger to better yourself for 15 years. So it's, again, not the end all be all. There's continuing education, but not enough to, I think, really warrant a drive to be better. So
basically what we've talked about so far is covering the basics or the bare minimum to see if your planner or your advisor is competent and somebody you should look into. But even then, if they're licensed, if they have a designation, even if they don't have a designation, the next couple things that we're going to look at give you more insight into if they're the right fit and if they're what you really should be looking for. So one of the things that I think is very common is there are a lot of folks in different parts of the industry that they have their CFP, their broker check, their IAPD, it all looks great. But they work for a broker dealer. They sell commissioned investment products. So they've passed all the check boxes, if you will. But if you're looking for planning, if you're looking for in-depth advice on your whole financial life, the CFP doesn't say, hey, this person's going to give it to you. So what are a couple things that we can look at to say this person is doing what's best for me? They have the competence and the experience to help me. How do I know for sure?
So I think a couple things is fiduciary is a really big one now. So, and we'll get to that.
That word gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah, that word gets thrown around to the point where people just lie about it now. There's no real, and that's the terrible part is it's kind of one of those things where I always say, like, when you look at someone that's like filing their taxes and they're like, you hear the person's like, social media is like, oh, I wrote off my haircut because it's technically business, or I wrote off this because it's that. I mean, like, is that legal? Probably not. Are they going to get audited? Maybe not. It's millions of tax returns. It's the same kind of principle here. Someone can call themselves a fiduciary and not actually be a fiduciary, and more than likely they're probably going to get away with it, and they're just terrible people. But looking for that, what that word means is that advisor has to act in your best interest. Typically, if you want to look and see, is that person actually a fiduciary more than just what they say, look at the way they charge you. So are they charging a fee or a flat fee, or are they charging you a commission? So that's one thing to look for. Again, it's not necessarily saying this person is a comprehensive planner or just a broker, but it is something at least for you to understand a little bit. So what I often say is, all right, well, if you're interviewing advisors, ask what the cost is. They should be able to very easily break that down for you. If you've been working with an advisor, ask them, hey, how much have I paid you this year? How much have I paid you over the last 2 years? If they can't figure that out, that's a red flag. If they can't tell it to you clearly, that's a red flag. If they do explain it and it seems remarkably convoluted, probably a red flag as well. So it's one of those things where you wouldn't go and purchase something from the grocery store and then be like, I don't really care what the price is, I'm just going to buy it. No, you want to know what the price is. You're buying a product. It's the same thing. You are buying a service. The same way you purchase any other service from anywhere else, you want to understand how they're getting charged, whether it's hourly, flat, commission, percent of the money you're managing. So know that. Because that is something that is extremely important, and you want to make sure that is aligned with what you are looking for as well. I would say the other thing is there a plan? So like you have kind of the compensation side, or they a fiduciary, that kind of explains that. But then do they do planning? If you say, all right, well, what's the plan? And they're like, all right, well, we're going to get you in this investment account. We're going to buy these mutual funds, and we're going to go. Great. Again, what's the plan? That's just an investment strategy. So really push, because again, the advisor is working for you. You are the end client. Get what you are worth and get what you need, and that is a plan. So if you are looking for a plan, make sure they have a plan. Is it a software they use? Is it something they are able to build out for you? Is it a physical takeaway? Is it a portal you have access to? Know that, because you need to have a plan if you're looking for a planner. And someone just saying, oh, save in a Roth IRA, invest this way, is not a plan. You're just driving blind, hoping that it works out at that point. Now, if you just want an investment manager, that's completely fine. You can do that.
Yeah.
So what are some other things you would typically say, hey, what are you going to be looking for? What are you trying to kind of figure out when you're evaluating a advisor?
Yeah, I think, when you're working with an advisor, especially Andrew mentioned, if you're just looking for investment management, it's important, to understand the firm you're working with, the person you're working with, make sure that it's still a comfortable relationship, but it's a little bit less personal than I think a planning relationship is.
Yeah. And
so when you're getting into a planning relationship, I think one of the most important things is that you have a very strong sense of trust, that you want to work with this person, that you want to see them again. If you meet with somebody and you're like, I don't know if I want to be in the same room as them again, maybe they shouldn't be taking care of your entire financial life. And so one of the things that I think when we talk about fees if you are walking into a meeting and you feel a very, very strong pressure to make an immediate decision or to get into something that you're not even really sure what you're getting into, that might give you a little bit of a pit in your stomach or a feeling that you shouldn't move forward with that process. If there's something that they want you to sign, in the first meeting, before you even understand how they're compensated or the details or anything, you just hear that it's good and it's what you need to do, take a step back. Maybe it's not a red flag, but you at least need to do some more research and find out some more information on what you're paying and what you're paying for.
No, yeah, because it's, again, that is a sales tactic across, like, not just in finance, any sales, is urgency. You want the person to feel like there's an urgency, so they are incentivized to kind of close the deal quickly. Yeah. We're talking about retirement planning.
Sure.
We think in terms of 5, 10, 15, 20 years. There's not a lot of urgency you can have in that period when it comes to, like, there's some things that I would say are relatively more urgent. And I think in a financial planning kind of category, something to take place this year, I would consider urgent. Hey, we need to max out your Roth IRA, or we need to do this conversion strategy, or we need to do X, Y, Z.
Do you have a will in place?
Yeah, needs to be done by December 31st. So unless we're meeting on December 28th, there's not a real urgency. And arguably, if you're meeting on December 28th, it's too late.
Correct.
So paperwork's not going to process in time. No, so if they're sitting there like, hey, your investments are terrible. This is what I hear the most. Your investments are super risky. We got to get this moved. This is coming down right here. The Fed's going to cut rates. We have this presidential election, blah, blah, blah. There's always going to be something. That's the problem. It's like there's always going to be something coming up, and we got to get you addressed now. So we got to get this account open. We got to get this transfer coming in, and we got to get this reallocated, or you're dramatically at risk. One, if you're working with a planner, even if you were working with the best investment manager of all time, they don't have a crystal ball 3 months into the future to even know what's going to happen. And if you're working with a financial planner, more than likely they're in meetings most of the time. So the investment management side is going to be fairly plain vanilla. That is a sales tactic, and I would say that is a red flag at that point. If it's not something that's going to be calendar year sensitive, like you're setting up the meeting at the beginning of December and you're trying to get set up, or you're setting something up in October and you're trying to get an employer-sponsored plan set up for the next year, there's a very few set of things that are going to be, hey, we
got to get this done.
We got to get this done. And those are calendar date things more related to what your IRS requirements are. They're not going to be investment management related things in 99% of cases. So what are some other ways you can look at? So that's kind of getting on the fee side of what you should look for. What's kind of the next big thing that you want to, maybe after you've started working with an advisor, how can you verify kind of where your money is, what it's doing, making sure they're above board? Because you've had the meetings, you've looked them up, you've understood how they get charged, you've understood they do a plan, they don't do a plan, looked at their designations, all that. So now you're working with them. How do you just say, all right, I developed a little bit of a rapport with this guy, starting to build a trust, some trust with them. Again, that's something that's earned and built over time. It's not going to happen with one meeting.
Yeah.
But how do you start to say, all right, let me just make sure I'm watching over things first few months, know where it is, or even know what to avoid before I sign the paperwork? Because that's the other thing, like going back to this Ponzi scheme, there wasn't a lot of ways to kind of verify because there wasn't a kind of third party. So walk me through that process. So I'm in your office, Austin, and you're like, all right, I want to work with you. Let's get the accounts open. But where am I actually opening accounts? What do I need to look for? What does that look like?
You've gone through all the verification processes that we've just talked about and Andrew just mentioned. I think one of the things you need to ask is, all right, whenever I start this process, I'm comfortable with the fees. You've talked about the plan, and these are the accounts I need to open, and this is how I'm going to contribute. All that's great. You should ask, one, do they work with a custodian, and if so, who?
What's a custodian?
So a custodian is similar to a bank in the sense that it is holding assets for you as a person, as a client. The advisor is not in control of the assets. They don't hold it. They don't have some special account that they have that you have to transfer your assets into or deposit money into. It's somebody else entirely. So it's somewhat of a barrier between the advisor who is assisting you at the investment management side of things and your actual money. And so, for instance, at our firm, we use a couple different custodians, but the main one is Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab has been around for a very long time. Every client that we have, all of their assets are held at Charles Schwab. So I couldn't go into, so-and-so's account and really do anything but trade. I can't deposit money into a different account. I can't take money out into a different account. It's their money at a different financial institution.
So we can so the advisor has the authority to trade. They have the authority once given to move money back and forth to the client's bank account. But all of that requires signatures. It's never done without something from the client requiring permission. Like, we can't add a bank account that doesn't have the client's name on it without a signature. We can't add a bank account that does have the client's name on it without a signature. All of it is done through a essentially third party, because the actual advisory firm is not a bank and is not an institution.
Yep.
Now, you might work with like a Morgan Stanley advisor who then uses Morgan Stanley because Morgan Stanley is massive. You might work with a JP Morgan Chase advisor or a bank that you actually see the funds invested, but that advisor is just an employee of
Correct.
that firm. Or you might work with, like us, an independent firm that we're not going to be a big enough entity to actually have a custodian.
Correct.
So I always like this because you say, all right, we're going to open the accounts at Charles Schwab. What that does is that creates an automatic barrier. So you have a password that with Schwab, the advisor doesn't have access to. You can always circumvent the advisor and call Schwab directly to get your account information. So there is a 1-800 number that you can call. You can see your accounts. There's an online portal. You get tax documents, statements, everything. You're not getting a Excel spreadsheet sent to you from your advisor with your account holdings on it. You actually have a legitimate login.
Great point. And I think that brings us to the next thing is if you're working with an advisor, you've already made sure they have a custodian. That gives you direct access to everything you need to monitor what's going on with your accounts. So one of the things that we think you should be doing is you should be logging in, printing off a statement, downloading a statement, and then just taking a look. Now, you might not recognize all of the investments that the advisor has been using in your account. But I think a couple things that you can look at is, one, if you haven't already talked about the fees, you can most likely see the fee on your account statement on a monthly or quarterly basis.
And that's depending on how the advisor gets paid.
Correct.
If it's a commission-based advisor that's not a fiduciary,
You might not have any fees that you see.
Yeah, that you see. Those fees aren't going to be transparent. They're not going to come out as a monthly management fee. It's not going to be an invoice to you. It is going to be a back-end fee. That is something where, again, you have to make sure you understand that prior to starting the relationship. Because I meet with so many people that are like, well, your fees are way higher. I'm like, no, they're not. And they're like, well, I see it here. I don't see that with my old advisor. I was like, that's because it was very opaque. You couldn't see it with your old advisor, but it was a little bit higher. So just make sure you know.
Yeah. And so if you already have an advisor and you look back at the last, 4 to 6 months of statements and you don't see any fees, maybe you should ask the question.
Yeah, it's like, hey, what am I actually paying you? And again, that shouldn't be something that's an uncomfortable question. I have clients that like to know to the cent how much I've paid them pretty much every time we meet. Perfectly fine, because again, any advisor worth their salt is more than willing to say, hey, this is the value I add, this is what I pay. If you don't like it, you can go to a different firm, find someone else. But if you genuinely think we add value to support that,
this is what you pay me.
Yeah, so just like anything else. Now, the other thing is when you look at your statement, look at what you're invested in. Now, this might be something where you don't understand it and it's on the advisor to educate you. It might be why you're using an advisor. You don't want to know about investing.
Yeah.
But if you look at your statement and you look at the holdings, just Google search. So I looked at one of our holdings that we use is not a recommendation. I'm just saying this, is SPLG. Which means it's a S&P 500 fund. So I can Google SPLG, ETF and find information on SPLG. So you should be able to do a quick Google search just on the names of the funds or the ETFs you're holding and find some information about them. If you are looking one up and you can't find anything online, maybe ask your advisor, be like, hey, what is this that you have me in? Can I get in and out of it? Is it liquid? If I wanted to sell it and cash it out today, am I able to do that? Because that's where I think a lot of people get into trouble, and where a lot of people leave advisors with a really bad taste in their mouth. Even if it's not fraudulent, the advisor can put you in something that isn't liquid, that might be very opaque. So I think of a lot of real estate type funds where like you might purchase into it, but you can only sell out of it a few times a year, or you can only get out of it when the fund expires, which is sometimes indefinitely. And it might have good returns at start, but then it might really tank and you're stuck in it. So I have run into a lot of cases where people have these legacy holdings from advisors they worked with after the financial crisis that were in like distressed real estate or blah, blah, blah. And they have just been dogs from a return standpoint for like 8-9 years, but the fund hasn't closed, so they can't get out of it. It's just a liquid at that point. So no matter what they want to do with it, they can't do anything with it. So it's one of those things, just keep an eye out, look for that stuff. It is important. Again, and we're talking about verifying your advisor. Ideally, like everything's above board, but just know, because that's where you get into a little bit of, I think the potential to have a bad experience is an advisor puts you in something, you never had this conversation, you didn't understand it, and then you're not able to get out of it.
Right. I think that leads us to the next point, which is throughout this entire process, you should feel comfortable, and you should never feel bad. Absolutely. Asking questions. You should always ask questions, whether it's about your account statements, how they're paid, what investments they're using, why they're using them, what risk is associated with that investment. I think, one of the things that we try to do is there's 3 different types of risk, which I think we talked about in a different video. But one of them is risk tolerance. So how comfortable are you with a certain investment product and the risk associated with it? Yeah. A good advisor is not only going to tell you about the products that you're in, what investment strategy they're using, but they're also going to tell you what risk is associated with those investment products and why you're using them. If someone is overly conservative, we might tell them that. We might show them a product, tell them about the risk associated with it, but then we're going to back up the recommendation with, hey, based on the plan that we've created with you, we noticed that you need to up your level of risk for XYZ reasons, and walk through that and answer any questions. And alternatively, if they're overly aggressive, we're going to do the same thing. So ask questions about all of this, whether it's their broker check history or their designation. There's no such thing as a stupid question that you can ask. And if you're paying somebody for a service, you have the right to ask.
And just to clarify, by product, like investment allocation is
Correct.
What we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I would say too, just to wrap this up, is you should never feel dumb for asking a question. Definitely met with I am remarkably not knowledgeable about cars, pretty much anything outside of financial planning. I'm pretty illiterate on. I have definitely asked questions to car salesmen, and they have looked at me like I was an absolute moron and wasting their time for asking a genuine question. And that was for a one-time transaction. Like at the base of it, like you were starting a relationship to work with someone for ideally years. Working with a financial planner in 90% of cases is not a one-off. Like you do have some cases where they just want to review, but it's a long term. So like you want to make sure it's someone, again, we've already talked about, you feel comfortable with, but encourages those questions and creates an atmosphere where they're not belittling you for asking a question. They're not trying to like answer shortly and move on, but they are giving you a well thought out, reasonable explanation that if you have any questions on, they are more than open to follow up questions on that. Like you should be able to leave a conversation that you had a question on, knowing, hey, I feel like I know a little bit more. I feel like he explained or she explained context, and I feel like they were very receptive of that question. I mean, it honestly, bare minimum of what an advisor should do, even if they do nothing else, be able to answer a question. And I'm always surprised when I hear of like, oh, well, I asked XYZ and they gave me a one sentence answer. Like, don't worry about it. That's why you hired me. I literally, one of my pet peeves is when someone says, don't worry about it. That's why you hired me.
That's not why they hired you.
No, not at all.
If they pass step 1, 2, 3, and 4 of all the things we've talked about, from their credentials to their fees to the custodian to the types of investments, if they're not somebody that you feel that you can trust with questions, if you feel like you're an inconvenience, you're not only paying them for their expertise, but you're also paying them to be your advisor. They're giving you advice, which is not just they're managing your investments and they gave you some answers on, hey, you should do this and don't ask questions about it. You're supposed to leave meetings with a financial advisor feeling more confident and educated about your path forward, not less. Yeah. So if you feel leaving confused and belittled, maybe it's time to find someone who doesn't make you feel that way. I
would say ideally you get 1 through 4 right. You interview like 3 advisors. All 3 of them check out all of those boxes. Then it's personality type. If you were making a decision on who to work with based on personality type after everything else, I mean, that's 3 advisors that are all going to be top notch for you. And then you pick the one that you can see that long-term relationship with. That's the ideal world, is you meet with 3 competent professionals. Then it's just, all right, who could I see myself like regularly talking to, corresponding with? And then it becomes things like, all right, well, I emailed them. Do I get a response same day, 2 days later? Do they have a staff? Do they have a succession plan? How old are they? When are they going to retire? Are they going to retire the same year or before I retire? Because that's a big question. So it's those, once you get past that, it's all the other little questions that like you want to just start saying, like, what are their business practices? When can they have meetings? And it's the things that matter a little bit less because it's not competency, but then it's the like small convenience things. So that's where you get it. But I think if you can hit all of those, I think you've done your due diligence on being able to verify your advisor. And if any one of those things throws up a roadblock or throws up something you're not sure about, that's where you maybe stop that process and say, hey, I might not be going forward with this person. Or I really want to get a little bit more of an explanation on why this is this way and what the reasoning is, and make sure I truly agree with it. So, but any last things to wrap up on how to verify your advisor?
I think that's it.
Well, perfect. Guys, thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Check out the rest of our videos, and we'll be putting more up shortly. Thanks. Bye.